what makes for a really interesting story is very rarely what makes for a good case study. That's the game that you're signing up for, right? As an entertainer. An entertainer and a creator and an influencer, it's all the same shit. They're all synonyms. Again, not a bad game, but it's wildly different than the game of building a business. And so the main thesis of the book is to look at things like content, like social media, like platforms, as lagging indicators of success, not leading indicators of success, as something that amplifies your efforts, doesn't drive your efforts. You gotta be good at what you're doing first. I call it the Sesame Street razor, which is don't infuse your hypothesis into a question. If you're asking, oh, how do I use content to get more customers? How do I get more followers on Instagram in order to get more customers? You're infusing your hypothesis into the question. Your hypothesis is that Instagram is the best way to get more customers. Well, what you're doing when you do that is you're actually shutting yourself off to all of other potential possibilities of solving that problem. My wife is pregnant with our third child. I have a 7 and 2-year-old. She's been in bed ill for the last month. I run 2 businesses. I have a book that I'm marketing. I'm halfway through the next book. My neighbor just had her first chemotherapy appointment, and her 2 girls are going to be living at our place while she's going through treatment. Yo, I got a lot of shit going on, Lewis. But I'm still going to be able to get the newsletter out because it's low lift. I think you have to design things to work even in the bad times, even in the tough times. There's always going to be something that's going to be the hot new kid on the block. And inevitably, the people who chase after it are going to flame out like Icarus too close to the sun.
John, how are you doing today? I'm so excited to be chatting.
Lewis, this is exciting, man. This is the first of the podcast I'm doing for my book, and I'm honored to talk to you, man.
Yeah, you've got a long bio. I mean, it's very specific. Like you're the guy, one of the OGs for the online personal training industry, and you've written tons of books, self-published on that, and that's been an interesting growth channel for you. A lot of different things, right? Publishing content that's like the hardest part of explaining the values of it is like, where do I start? And you just don't want to complicate the conversation, but it's like, well, it has this benefit and this benefit. But let's start present day. Tell me about the upcoming book, where this is podcast
Sure.
number 1 on the tour, and the thesis, the type, like all that good stuff. I mean, I have the title, but
You've got the title. The upcoming book is called The Obvious Choice: Timeless Lessons on Success, Profit, Finding Your Way. This is my first traditionally published book. I've sold over 200,000 self-published books over the years. And I decided to traditionally publish this one because it's more mass market. It is, a company has kind of helped 65,000 plus small businesses, mostly in the fitness industry, although not only, figure out how to get customers better, like figure out how to navigate this insane world of, what do I do? Do I knock on doors? Do I cold call? Do I do flyers? Do I do paid ads? Do I post content? Like, what the heck do I do? And I started writing a book for them. And then I realized I was like, no, this has got wider global applicability. And in and around that same time, an amazing literary agent kind of ran me down at a conference that I was speaking at. And we had a great conversation and kind of decided to mold the book to be more mass market. And it's really about finding your way. If I had to define it simply, there's 15 lessons. Each chapter can be read independent of one another. But the central underlying theme is to really figure out what game you're playing and play the shit out of it. There are conflating games that we're all convinced today. There's the game of trying to win the internet, and then there's the game of trying to build a business. Neither game is better or worse, but they have different rules of engagement, time horizons, odds of success, and reward mechanisms. Like, back in the day, if I wanted to become an entertainer, I'd go to Hollywood. Right, Lewis? Like, I knew what I was signing up for. I knew that the odds of success were going to be low. I knew that I'd probably wait tables on weekends to make ends meet. I knew that I'd go to tons of auditions, and with the hopes that I'd be one of the chosen few outliers that would make it big. And then, in the words of, what's his name, George R. Romano, Night of the Living Dead, that Hollywood would then pay me $1 million to go out and fuck. Like, that's the game that you're signing up for, right, as an entertainer. An entertainer and a creator and an influencer, it's all the same shit. They're all synonyms. Again, not a bad game. But it's wildly different than the game of building a business. And so the main thesis of the book is to look at things like content, like social media, like platforms, as lagging indicators of success, not leading indicators of success, as something that amplifies your efforts, doesn't drive your efforts. You got to be good at what you're doing first.
Hmm. Is that where the title comes in?
Well, the obvious choice is just it's better to be the obvious choice for a few people than a just okay case choice for a lot of people. Like, what would you rather have? I give the example of like a neighborhood business. So you said that you're in Vegas right now. You split your time between, what'd you say, New York and Phoenix, right?
Phoenix.
Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time in all those places. And my parents spend the winters in Scottsdale, so I've been there a ton. New York,
Yep.
I've been to a lot, and Vegas for a lot of much stupider reasons that we could talk about. I've been to a bunch of times, but you walk up and down the street in any of those places and look at the businesses and look at the names on the buildings and like what percentage of those do anything on social media? What percentage of those, any of their success, has anything to do with their, top three things you need to learn about real estate development? Zero were close to it. And so I give the example of what would you rather have, if we're using like a fitness example, would you rather have 10,000 people view, call it your content, who are tangentially interested in fitness, who are listening to your tips about how to get a six pack, the same as they're listening to Steven's tips in Germany about how to get a six pack? Or would you rather be the obvious choice to 50 people who live within a 2 mile radius around where you are physically located right now? And then perhaps over time that expands out. And there are ways to do that, and I get into that in the book. But it all starts with what I call fixing what's inside of your fence first, becoming famous to the family. That might be location specific. It might be a family that exists online in a tiny little bubble,
Hmm.
but it's the same idea.
Yeah, I mean, I have so much coming to mind from that. I think one about the fitness coach I hired recently. A lot of why I decided to hire him, and I was in the market. Like I was like, I'm hiring a coach by the end of the year. And what drew me to him was he just had one like an achievable natty physique. It's like in terms of like I'm not someone who like I wasn't looking for who's the biggest, strongest guy. It's like he had it like he looks like me in his before pictures, and then his after pictures look like roughly where I want to go. Right? He doesn't look Olympia. He doesn't look like a bodybuilding.com guy. He's just like great at like my age. The diet he talks about was very close to my diet. I'm like, this guy's gonna help me tighten up what's loose. So he was just so like it was I was it wasn't something I was reverse engineering, I wasn't seeking out. But then when I came across him, it was just like, oh, this is exactly who I'm going to resonate with. And then in terms of and like the hyperlocal examples make a lot of sense. Hyperlocal meaning geographically. And I think about how, so many of I don't know if you're familiar with the Client Ascension group on Twitter. They're a bunch of marketing agency owners. There's, again, just a lot of different pods and masterminds in different industries. And so many people, or just like Hampton and that mastermind, right? Sam Parr's mastermind, so many people, or Jordan Ross, he's another person on Twitter who has the 8-figure agency mastermind that have these pods. People just become the guy within this community of 100 to 300 overlapping businesses around similar size, similar maturity, similar values, and they just build their entire business on the back of one community.
100%. There's an example that I give in the book. Somebody named David, because he didn't want me to use his real name, but he's a fitness coach, and he was struggling. And he was running ads, he was doing content, and he couldn't get anything to work. And so he joined one of these masterminds. It was $10,000 to join. He split it up over 12 months because he couldn't afford the payments, and he could afford like the first 2 payments. And he was like, well, I'll probably make enough to like pay the rest of them, or my credit card will, cancel, and then I guess they'll kick me out. And he joined it with the explicit goal of figuring out what was missing in his ads and his content. And that's something that I think is very common these days, where we seem to think that if we're doing a lot of what's not working, the answer is to do a little bit more of it with prettier pictures. Work harder. And it's just such a silly belief. It's, I call it the Sesame Street razor. which is don't infuse your hypothesis into a question. If you're
Can you explain that?
asking,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
interesting.
so if you're asking, oh, how do I use content to get more customers? How do I get more followers on Instagram in order to get more customers? You're infusing your hypothesis into the question. Your hypothesis is that Instagram is the best way to get more customers. Well, what you're doing when you do that is you're actually shutting yourself off to all of other potential possibilities of solving that problem. And it's not saying that necessarily that's not the best way to do it, but it's definitely not necessarily the best way to do it. And so that's what often happens. And then you go down this path of trying to improve your production quality or figure out how to get better thumbnails or hack the algorithm this week until the Silicon Valley profiteers decide to change the algorithm and then you're screwed again. And it's just this endless cycle of trying to catch up. And what do we know when we're always trying to catch up is then we're never ahead. Whereas what David figured out when he joined this is exactly what you just said, Lewis, which is why I love it. Because this is an example of the book. You nailed it. David joined this mastermind this was a men's mastermind, of men who are looking for professional development to better their business, right? People who do one thing, do other things like that thing. People who hire expensive coaches, hire a lot of expensive coaches. People who don't hire coaches, don't hire coaches. That alone, people who buy lots, people who don't, is the single most important thing you need to know about selling things if you want to simplify your approach. In David's case, people who join this mastermind are men who are already committed to personal growth, who already are the types of people who are spending $10,000 plus on a coaching group.
Mm-hmm.
Yo, this mastermind owner has already done the hard work for David. He's already collected all of his customers. David went in there, and he's the only fitness guy, and he started answering questions in the group. There were 3 meetups a year of, public meetups where they get together in a place, right? Retreat type stuff. And David volunteered to lead the morning workout yoga session. There was some breathwork stuff. I think it was in California. People in California love breathwork and sitting in buckets of ice. So he was doing some of that kind of stuff. And
They certainly do. Can confirm.
Himalayan sound bowls, and overpriced hummus. And so what they did, of course, is David led this thing, and then he was the obvious choice within that group. 3 people hired him within that group. He took that money, he joined another group and another one. David spends over $100,000 a year now on masterminds. He doesn't have a website. He doesn't post on social media. He doesn't run ads. All he does is he's active participants in these masterminds, and he makes over $1 million in profit from his coaching business. It's like, it's not a bad way to do it, right? You reverse engineer the problem. Where are my people already, and what do they buy? Instead of trying to convince people to change in order to buy from you, you just find people are basically already exhibiting that behavior.
Yeah. He's definitely not the first person to say this. He's just the first person I heard say it.
Mm,
That markets are places,
mm,
right? A market's a
mm,
place. Like
mm.
if you think in the literal context, um, you have the Shuk in like either Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. That's a market. That's a famous market. That is like that's what
Okay.
I think when I think of like market as a place. It's like you go to the market, and that
Right.
is where commerce is occurring.
Yeah.
And again, a place is a destination physically or online, whether it's the group
Mm,
chat or the events. And that's a lot of why, so much of my business this year came from being in New York City and Manhattan. Because like one, people there spend money on rent. Like if they can afford to be there, they can afford to be there. And
yeah.
then they're the types of people going to meetups. And there's something I want to ask about in just a second. And this will probably be my next question, just finishing after this point. Buyers are buyers. I have a friend who built a very massive e-commerce business, and a lot of his secret is just the low ticket funnel, meaning the people on his email list get on his email list after buying a product under
Yeah.
$100.
Yeah.
But then those people have already the people who spend $1 to get on your list versus the people who take the free lead magnet. It's
Right.
like the free lead magnet, those people sign up for free versus the people willing to spend $1 for the lead magnet, are people willing to, just the psychological difference between people willing
Yeah.
to spend $8 to get on your list versus not. They're buyers. There's buyers and there's non-buyers. There's just two types of people that invest in their stuff versus people who only do stuff for free.
And
Again,
I
even
would go
people
so
who
far
buy
as
a
to say
book are still
there's
buyers.
levels. There's levels to it, right?
Yeah.
Like 0 to 1 is a chasm, 1 to 20, 20 to 50, 51 to 100, I would say 100 to 1,000, and then like 3,000 plus. Like there's significant levels, and within that, there's actually a lot of levers that you can pull, kind of within there. But you're right. It's very easy to acquire free customers. I mean, one of these newsletter referral farms taught us that you can basically trick somebody to click on a button. Are they a valuable subscriber or not? Do they even know that they subscribed or not to you? And so you see this like insane growth of some of these newsletters, and then it's all fake growth, right? These aren't buyers that are on these newsletters. And so that's what a good agency, like a good email newsletter agency, will do, is they'll get you perhaps even slower growth, but much higher quality.
I mean, one of my favorite case studies is someone who had only had 130 people on his list, right?
Yeah.
From our business. But one thing you brought up about, let's call him David, right? Pseudonymous David, is how he would answer questions in the community about what he's doing. I think that's something that is a strategy you've executed as well strategically for growing your list, building your following, building your influence, is deliberately answering questions in Facebook groups, on Reddit, and doing it in like a deliberate way, not just like jumping in there and just kind of firing off like a half-hearted answer, but something like you've really thought through strategically, kind of like walk me through that. Someone was telling me about it and I thought it was a clever strategy.
I mean, there's like 5 questions that anybody ever asks about your industry ever. Like you can bucket them pretty quickly. And so I work backwards. I generally don't think about these things in advance. But what I'll do is that whenever somebody asks me a question or asks a question that I see, like the Reddit personal training community or whatever, right? What I'll do is I'll take the time. If I'm going to answer them, I'll take the time to write them a really good answer. And then I'll document that answer. And so I'll write it again as a generalized answer down in a document. And I just use the notes in my phone. And I have the notes in my phone categorized based off of common questions that people ask. Because inevitably, I'm going to see that again somewhere. And then the next time I see that question again, well, I'll go and copy and paste that really full, complete answer in. Maybe I'll incorporate some feedback or something, and I'll continue to improve that kind of FAQ. And then I'll personalize it a little bit. And then over time, I'm just doing this over and over and over again. And I mean, this book, like, that's this book, for example. And then at one point, you just self-publish it as a book, all of my answers. So this is, how many is this? This one is 51 answers. How do you gather testimonials? How do you avoid chasing after clients after they take a break in training? What kind of assessment should you do? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think, Lewis, what you're getting at here is I'm the laziest, ambitious person that you're ever going to meet. I don't want to do anything more than once. I'm happy to do it really well one time, but I don't want to do it more than once. That's one of the reasons why I love books, is because very often, if somebody says to me, hey, what software should I use for this? Or whatever question about my industry, I have that answer in a book. And because I've self-published all of my books, like if they're industry-specific, niche-specific books, like you probably shouldn't traditionally publish. So because I've self-published the books, I can do whatever I want with them. So I say to people, I'm like, the book is $20 on Amazon. If you can't afford that, here's a link where you can get the book for free by entering your email. And I just let them choose. Right? I'm not going to get rich off of my books. And some people buy the book on Amazon. But of course, what happens then is these are always posted in public threads. So these are in Facebook groups. These are in Reddit. Well, you're never answering for the person specifically, just for the person specifically that you're answering in any of those communities, are you? There's going to be 100, 200, 500,000 onlookers, especially if it's in Reddit. Reddit ranks in Google these days really well. You're going to have that pay you dividends. So all that I'm doing over time is I think about it like kind of arms of the octopus. I'm just putting out these feelers all over the place. And because I've cataloged these answers, and then over time, because I've produced a book or a lead magnet that A generates me revenue if they buy the book, but even if I don't, there's a like books have value to them, right? And so if I say this book is $20 on Amazon and they go to Amazon and they see that the book is $20 and they can get it for free as a lead magnet, that lead magnet now has tangible value. So some people might buy it on Amazon if they want to support me, but even the ones who don't, other onlookers are now going to enter in their email and perhaps put a little bit more, effort into consuming the content because it's clearly not hacked together. And how many of these things now exist out in searchable Facebook groups or Twitter threads or Reddit posts or even on my Instagram, like you do like many chat automations, DM me whatever to get this thing. It's just every day there's, 2 email subscribers from there, 5 from there, 2 from there, 10 from there. Like, I don't even know how many of these little robots are working for me at this point. Thousands? I have no idea, right? Thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands. But it's never a big one-time thing that I build over time. All that it is just, again, my laziness. I don't want to answer a question twice. I want to, anything that I do, I want to figure out a way to make it work for me for a very, very long period of time.
Yeah, I think, every piece of content, let me walk back a half second.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read Scott Adams' book about like useful beliefs? I forget what it's called. He published it last year, and the book wasn't about useful beliefs. It was an idea from the book.
He's the Dilbert
I'll
guy.
look it up. He's the Dilbert guy. Scott
I read a
Adams'
couple of his
books.
books. I read one, Win
It was called
Bigly.
Reframe Your Brain.
I didn't read that one.
He published
No.
it. When did he publish it?
I like
when
his
he
stuff.
published it.
I like his books. I mean, I don't know. Everybody bitches about his politics and whatever. I don't really care. As a Canadian, most American politics are purely entertainment for me. So I don't have a strong opinion. But Win Bigly
He does have strong opinions.
He does. Well, Win Bigly was a fascinating examination of human psychology.
Alright.
That's the
I
one
haven't
where
read it, but I'd like to.
dude, he tracked the Trump presidency or the
Okay.
first Trump
Oh,
campaign.
yeah.
And
Oh, published in October of 2024. He just published that like 2 weeks ago.
no, Win Bigly, maybe he did an update.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, there's a edition. That makes sense. Why a second edition? He published the second edition
Yeah.
3 weeks
He
ago.
basically went
I'll
through
send a
all of
sample to my
Trump's
Kindle.
original, all of Trump's original campaign. He basically went through it and talked about the persuasion
Yeah, he
and
used to be a hypnotist,
psychological
right? So
techniques that he was incorporating as Trump was going through.
yep.
Super interesting. I mean,
Again,
I think
can't make political comments on this podcast. I mean, we can, right? But I prefer not to now that it's part of now that I have business partners that are stakeholders, and it's not just me. But
yeah,
Trump's a
I don't
brilliant
I don't
marketer.
have political opinions. I look at it as just a
Yeah,
marketing,
that's what I'm saying.
pure
He's a
marketing
brilliant
example.
marketer.
Yeah,
Yep. And I guess if we trace the thread back really quickly here,
yeah.
there's like 2 or 3 tracings of the thread. But Scott Adams has this idea in the other book of useful beliefs. Things
Okay.
that it's not necessarily how important something is to be exactly true, but if it's a useful belief, then it's like whatever.
Huh.
It can be useful even if it's not true.
Yeah. Okay.
And the idea that the useful belief that I'm proposing is that only care about like the only form of content worth making. Like, so obviously I could say in the extreme, all content creation is just like every piece of content exists as an answer to a question, right? Obviously, not every piece of content falls into that category or should be thought through that frame. Like, obviously, you publish fiction. That's not the point of publishing Harry Potter wasn't to be like, what if there was a book about wizards, right? Like that's not the you can frame everything into a question, but in terms of business content, educational content, um, what's the word for this? Functional content, right? In terms of consumer packaged goods, you have functional beverages. If functional content, all functional content simply exists as an answer to a question. If that's the frame, because again, I get the question on sales calls, what should we even write about? Like, why? What can I trust you to make that's useful, right? And I could say, look, if all we did was just say, I'm just going to answer questions that you get week over week over week over week over week, and that's my entire strategy. Like, I think it would be 85 to 95 to 98.5% as useful as also doing like a whole other strategy. It's just, we turn objections into subject lines. That's all we do. And we just do that every week. And then it's referable because even what we're doing, yeah, that's all we do week every week. And the even here now, right? And this is what we were discussing before we started recording. It's like it's so difficult to have these conversations about why content's useful because it's just so insanely useful, but the referability of it and the time leverage of like what are we discussing here? It's like he's packaged these ideas into a useful bundle, and you're like, check out this resource. And now I'm entering the Scott Adams rabbit hole. Again, if there's something we brought up in this podcast, for example, if someone had the question of like, I really want to emulate your strategy for doing this kind of FAQ based let's call it Reddit hacking if we want to make it up, right? Do you have a playbook? Do you have a one pager? Do you have a YouTube video on Reddit hacking? And maybe you do, maybe you don't. But maybe you decide there's enough value, there's enough probability that someone's going to ask you about that in the future, where you do spend the 5 minutes making a Loom video, or you spend the hour making a brief slideshow, and then everything else. Like there was this collaboration I was asked to do earlier this year, and then I want to get back to asking more questions. I just love everything you've brought up, and it inspires a lot of
I
creativity.
dig it, man.
Where I was asked
the best part about being on these podcasts is to learn from the host. Like straight
I
up.
appreciate that.
Like that's so go on. I love it.
Lately, I've started framing it as a conversational podcast, not an interview podcast, just to kind of set those expectations mutually.
Yeah.
And I was asked to create curriculum for this 6-week program, and I wasn't really sure. What I'm excited about it just to contribute to it, but I'm like, this is just going to hold me accountable to making 6 good slideshows.
Yeah.
And
right,
then
right.
I'm just confident that part of my goals for 2025 is to put more, tutorial style content on YouTube and educational content. So I'm like, just having something holding me accountable to making 6 good lectures that I can then remix later on is just useful for the accountability of it. And then, 2 weeks later, I hire some salespeople. I'm like, oh, go watch these videos I made already. Yep. And then I just have them, right? But if it's a video, if it's a newsletter, just having a bundled, useful thing. They're like, what do you sell? Why are newsletters useful? I'm not going to explain that. I'm like, wow, go watch this lecture on why newsletters are awesome. And now they're like, oh my God, they're awesome. And I didn't have to do anything. It's incredible.
The primary role of my podcast, which is the same name as the book,
the obvious choice
is for me, the obvious choice is for me to workshop and test and hold me accountable to write books. And so I have 2 co-hosts on my show. We don't, if I'm doing an interview with somebody else, if I'm bringing somebody else in, it's because I'm fascinated by them, because I'm researching something that they are an expert in for the book. And other than that, what I'm doing is we record twice a week. I have to be ready to present basically twice a week material that I'm thinking about or writing about in the book. And so they hold me accountable. It's external accountability. I learned that from my personal training days. They're basically coaches waiting for me. And if I don't show up, they're going to say, yo, we're looking at you. You better say something. And then they're very different than I am. I'm a white Jewish guy from a middle to upper class family in Toronto. Amber is a white woman from the Bible Belt in the United States, daughter of a military family. Wen is a black guy from North Carolina, son of a preacher. Mother died when he was young. It is such a phenomenal way to hack getting different perspectives and improving my own understanding about what I'm thinking about teaching. And so that's the primary purpose of it. But of course, now that we have the podcast, we inevitably say some interesting things on there that people like. And then we use that podcast to drive email subscribers and then conversations, which our sales team then turns into consultative sales conversations, which they book calls and customers out of. So on my Instagram and the stories and things like that, we'll tease the podcast episode and we'll say, reply with the word whatever. I don't know, leads, overwhelm. And I'll send you the links. And they send the link, and it's an opt-in for the podcast episode. So now they're opting in for the podcast episode. It's basically a content upgrade, which grows our email list. And then they'll follow up and they'll say, hey, I'm curious. What are you hoping that this is going to help you accomplish? And now they're in a consultative sales conversation right off the bat. It's the same piece of content, right? It's the same thing. And the goal is primarily to write better books. The goal is the high-end thing. That's the big thing that I'm working on. But you got to still use that in a way that is going to continually build the smaller things that are going to be able to make that kind of launch pad for the bigger thing.
Yeah, I've framed oftentimes the same kind of accountability as part of my pitch when I sell what we do. Because again, I'm not in the business of selling anything people can't do. I'm in the business of like, your newsletter benefits from consistency, and especially people who started one that I'm like, why'd we drop off? Like, you're going to fire me if we don't get this out every week. So I'm going to make sure that we do what we need to do
right,
to get from you what we need to get from you. And again, we do plenty of completely hands-off solutions, but some people want to stay involved in the process. It's like we turn it from a task into a workflow, and we're committed to it. And I manage you, right? There's two types of employees that you hire. There's employees that you hire, and then you have to manage them. Then there's employees that you hire, and they take over an area of responsibility, and they manage you for the pieces they need to do their job. We're the second kind.
Yeah, those
right?
are the best kind.
And I say, we're the second kind. And to get this newsletter out the door every week, here's what I'm going to need from you. And I'm going to be really diligent about getting it. Right. It's going to take no more than 5 minutes a week, 20 minutes, depending on the extent to which the content's like properly ghostwritten and we're actually extracting unique insights from the person versus just writing, let's say, a curation newsletter about an industry where we're just going and aggregating and doing research. Then we don't need any involvement from them. Right. And there's so many parallels here. And I think one thing we have to touch on in this podcast is your newsletter. Like even one benefit of the presentation that I made for newsletters, I never had like a definition for newsletters. And, because like part of my sales calls, it's very important to control the frame in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And if I get into a sales call with someone and they've shown interest in a newsletter, right? They've responded to an ad. Point is that they're interested in the concept of a newsletter, but I have to make sure we have the same idea about what a newsletter is, because if I control that frame, I can like express the right things. Versus again, to your co-hosts, they might think a newsletter is something that their church sent out once a month talking about when the next bake sale is, and they're like, why the hell would I pay $1,000 a month for that?
Right.
And so the way I've come to define it in this presentation is a newsletter is nothing but a strategy for email marketing. It's a type of email marketing strategy with clear expectations and a consistent format. And then what I do when I explain that to people is I usually on the call pull up a few landing pages of newsletters that do that extremely well. So I could go to the ptdc.com and read what your newsletter is. And I think it fully checks that box, right? 5 Reps Friday is a free newsletter for people who love lifting books and making money. Each issue has short tips on marketing, health, and earning more, in addition to a few quotes from a few great books. Clear expectations, consistent format, right? It's just an email marketing strategy with those two criteria.
Can I pull out something that you hit on that I think is so important that I love that you hit on, and I want to just like put a pin in it and highlight the hell out of it?
Yeah.
Expectancy in marketing, I think, is wildly underrated. Especially in a day and age with inconsistent algorithms where impressions are getting to be more expensive and more difficult. Like when I started, like I've been doing email marketing since 2011 and like heavy email marketing since 2011. When I started, you could really create an opera sequence email, using the Ben Settle jargon. You could really create a storyline across your emails. You could.
Is that what Russell called the soap opera sequence? He probably just like rebranded it. Same concept.
I mean, that's kind of what Russell Brunson has done across the board, right? Yeah. No, it all comes from Ben Settle originally. I mean, Russell Brunson is a great marketer too, but yeah, no, that comes from Ben Settle. And so soap opera sequence. So the idea, like you can create open loops in one email that increases the open rate of the next email. You can have anti-jokes that run. You can connect threads between emails. You can sit there and write 15 emails. I mean, you could do all of this before, because you could have a reasonable expectation that people on your list are going to open up the majority of your emails. Or people on your social media channels are going to see the majority of your posts. Or even you could pay for them to see the majority. You can't even pay for people to see the majority of your posts these days. And so the only way to solve that for me is to, yes, be consistent with quality, to make sure that what you produce either is delegated to a firm like yours at Orbit Marketing, where you guys handle it, or in my case, build a format that's low lift. I needed a format that I know I'm going to be able to get out. Dude, my wife is pregnant with our third child. I have a 7 and 2-year-old. She's been in bed ill for the last month. I run 2 businesses. I have a book that I'm marketing. I'm halfway through the next book. My neighbor just had her first chemotherapy appointment, and her 2 girls are going to be start living at our place while she's going through treatment. Yo, I got a lot of shit going on, Lewis.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to be able to get the newsletter out because it's low lift. I think you have to design things to work even in the bad times, even in the tough times. Because if you do that, they're also going to work when times are good, when things are easy. But if you design things that are optimistic, you're still going to be able to knock them out of the park when things are good. But inevitably, the only thing that we can expect with any degree of reliability in our life is that unexpected things are going to happen. And when that happens, you still need to be able to be consistent. And so the model that I built is low lift. I know that I can put it out. And when I have more time, I'll do more. And when I don't, I know that I'm going to be able to put it out. And then it's expectancy, because 7 a.m. every single Friday morning, 5 Reps Friday goes out. Without fault. On the dot. I know people who say, oh, this email goes out at 6 p.m. or whatever on Sunday night, and I'll get it at 9 p.m. sometimes. Doesn't work. You got to be able to expect it in your inbox if you want to maintain high open rates, if you want to maintain the exposure, which the real benefits to me of a newsletter is not the wisdom in the newsletter. It's just a way for people to gain more comfort with seeing your name. It's cognitive ease. We trust people. We see more often. We trust names. We trust faces. We see more often. And so consistency and form through low lift models or delegating and expectancy, I think, is so wildly underrated. Just amongst making sure your customers know what's coming, your leads, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Your people. I don't know.
And you create the opportunity for variety outside of that, because again, you can introduce at the end, you hit people with the 5 reps that they're used to seeing every Friday, and then just at the end you throw in whatever unique custom message. If you have something new to say, my wife just had her 3rd baby and here's a photo of my beautiful family, right? It's something, just a random personal thing to share that week, or it's my book's coming out and it's actually promotional, and you just create that. There's this understanding that as long as you also nailed the format you promised, you can kind of stuff in some other stuff right before a PS or an intro, and there's those opportunities to make your sales messages, or every email exists in service, every newsletter exists in service of some conversion, whether it's a short-term thing or a long-term thing, right? There's just a conversion, right? Whether your newsletter is to potential investors hoping that someone becomes an investor, whether it's potential people hoping to become a podcast listener, there is a conversion action that is in service of. Whether or not you have a short or long time horizon for that is a different thing. But ultimately, them reading the newsletter doesn't drive anything but goodwill. But then again, then you want to accumulate goodwill to be able to redirect it somewhere else eventually. And that could be for a charitable cause, or it could be for, it doesn't particularly matter. But you've outlined, in this interview, a lot of ways that you are putting effort into getting email subscribers. You're replying to
Sure.
things online with lead magnets, you're promoting the podcast with ManyChat. What are some of the valuable outcomes you've seen over time? Like, why have you been so hardcore on email marketing for 13 years? Like, why has it been worthwhile? Whether it's the current incarnation of, the
Man.
five, like, what's the ROI on, like you're
I'm
saying,
a,
I have a wife giving with a third kid on
yeah.
the way, we're doing a million other things, and it's still worth, why is it worth your time to do this?
If you were to, I look at internet years like dog years. I'm 96 years old as an internet guy. I've coached people who have coached people who have coached people who are now coaching people. This shit turns
You're
over
sitting at
every
the
two
top
years.
of the coach's coaching pyramid. You're at the peak of it.
I yeah, no, there's one or two rungs above me. I'm not the original. I'm not like the 2005 type guy, but I was pretty early. I was back in the day where I taught myself Photoshop. I taught myself HTML because there was really no other way. If you wanted to do this stuff, it was hard. And that barrier of entry, I think, was perhaps a good thing. You could trust things on the internet a little bit more. You had to kind of be good, or not necessarily be good. You had to take it a little bit more seriously than perhaps you do now, because it was harder to do and more expensive to do. And so if you were going to have a website or put information out, it was kind of hard to do it. Um, and so, self-selected people who were more serious and self-selected out people who weren't. And so the only reason that I bring that up is I've seen so much of this stuff come and go. Man, from Clubhouse to Periscope to Vine to Facebook Lives to Facebook groups to I can just name you,
If we want
going
to, oops,
backwards.
if we want to timestamp today, school, TikTok, TikTok Shop,
Who knows, man? And who gives a shit? Like, does any of it
Medium.
matter?
Medium was the whole thing. It's
At
yeah.
any point in time, there's always going to be something that's going to be the hot new kid on the block. And inevitably, the people who chase after it are going to flame out like Icarus too close to the sun. The part that's difficult for us watching it is that there's comparison. You're always going to compare yourself to whoever you believe is doing the best at that point in time. Because there's always going to be somebody who's going to have caught the trend at the top. And they're always going to be growing really fast. And it's always going to seem like you're going to be missing out as a result. The part that messes with your head the most, though, is that it's never the same person over time. You get that?
Hmm.
It's always different people, because the type of person who chases after these things is inevitably the type of person who makes bad decisions. Well, you can make a really bad decision that has a 95% chance of failure, and you're still going to win out 5% of the time. That person, that story, is going to get your attention because it's an outlier story, because you didn't expect it to happen. And so as a result, it's remarkable. We remark on it because we did not expect it to work. I don't believe that we should follow examples where we're so surprised and so entertained by that example because we did not expect it to work. Because that same person, if you followed them over their career, well, you know what? 6 years ago, they were an expert on Facebook Lives. 4 years ago, they were FX currency experts.
Hmm.
3 years ago, they were all in on Ethereum. Then they were day trading stocks. Then they were into NFTs. And now somehow miraculously these same people are experts in AI. Yo, the Venn diagram is a dot. This is the same person. I don't want to live my life where I have to reinvent myself every 2 years. And so I'm willing to give up missing out on trends as a result. I'm willing to give up those spikes as a result. and stick with the thing that I know is always going to work because it's always worked, which is human connection, which is building long-term relationship, which is building real tangible work that benefits people. That's why I love books. And you hold it. It's physical. It's tangible. Doesn't necessarily have to be books, but that's why I like email. Is I know at any given time it's not going to be the sexy thing, but I also know it's always going to be there. And I know that no matter what, like I wrote a book on social media, dude. Like I can game social media. It's not hard to do. I'll message Carmelina, who works with us every once in a while. I'm like, I'm going to go viral this week, probably gain 20 or 30 followers. She's like, okay, I'll be ready in your DMs. Like, it's not, once you know what triggers to push, it's not hard to do, but why? And so
it comes back to
reasons.
what we started the conversation with, right? Which is what's the game we're trying to play? Are we trying to win
What's
the
the
internet?
game
Or
you're
are we
trying
trying
to play?
to, yeah? What's the game we're trying to win?
There's,
Yeah.
there's viral material, there's value material, there's depth material. You need some combination of all three. Most people skew too much towards one. And so every once in a while, sure, yeah, go viral, like get eyeballs, grow your accounts. But you got to always have a place where it leads to, where you're going to be able to stick around there for the long term, where you're not worried that because you spoke about the Israel-Palestine, situation once, Instagram is going to limit your reach. Whichever side, I have friends who speak very openly on both sides, and you know what? Both of them have posted a story in the last week complaining that they got a message from Instagram saying we're limiting your reach.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want to play that game at all, regardless of any political opinions. Doesn't matter, right? I just don't want to play that game. That's why I like email.
I love it. I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up. You made so many good points there. Um, I think about the common Warren Buffett statement of, I don't know if it's a Warren Buffett thing, but maybe a Warren Buffett idea that, there are people who can flip heads in a row 20 times, right? If there's a billion
Yeah,
people, the odds of flipping heads, there's 100 people out of a billion who are going to flip heads in a row 20 times. And then
right.
they're just going to post about it on Twitter, right? And so you see
Yeah,
it, you have this hyper visibility into those extreme outliers of luck. Whereas again, but it's not the same person flipping heads 20 times in a row, 20 times in a row. And
yeah.
then on
It's
the email
there's a
side, yeah,
survivorship bias
exactly.
involved that I think we all need to really deeply understand what makes for a really interesting story is very rarely what makes for a good case study.
Ooh,
And
I like that. That's great. That's a
there's
good line.
yeah, well, you can read it about more about that in my book, The Obvious Choice. But I mean, there's an entire chapter really about this, um, about the difference between the two, about why we need to be careful when consuming sensationalistic stories of success, and what luck really is, and how to design our own luck. Uh, and a lot of it is mathematical. I mean, again, you can make the best decision in the world about what to do. I mean, the best investors in the world, the best decision makers with the best resources on the planet get it right about 60% of the time. And vote that, they're wrong 4 out of 10 times.
Hmm.
They're wrong 4 out of 10 times. They have to stick around long enough in order for the odds to even out. It's as simple as that.
I like it. Well, the book, I'll be publishing this around publishing time. So if you're listening to this,
Perfect.
the book's live. And so you're in January. Welcome to 2025.
Yes.
And the
Welcome to the
book's
future.
live.
Yeah.
Welcome to the future. Yeah, we're recording this months out or early. But the book's timeless ideas. So it doesn't really matter. Things that don't
Yep.
change. Algorithms
Love it.
change, but humans don't. That's on the page, on the Amazon page. Algorithms
That
change,
is
humans
on it.
don't.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Yeah.
obvious choice, you're also It's Coach Goodman across the board. Um,
All the places that
at
matter.
It's Coach Goodman.
Yeah.
I'm just stoked that we had this opportunity to connect.
Me too.
I think
Yeah,
there's a
it's been a
lot
long
of
time coming.
hard fought wisdom revealed in the pages and revealed in this conversation. So you spent a lot of time putting effort into answering questions that are worth knowing the answers to. So spend more time with Jonathan, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Appreciate that, Lewis. Thank you, man.